The thunderous roar of rain pounding against the wooden cabin drowned out Sarah Duncan's desperate pleas as she pressed a damp cloth to her daughter's burning forehead, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across her tear-streaked face. February 1877 had brought the worst storm Centralia, Washington Territory, had seen in decades, and with it came a fever that had claimed the strength of her two children faster than she could blink. Sarah glanced toward the other small bed where her son lay shivering despite the 3 quilts piled atop his tiny frame. At only 6 and 4 years old, Emily and Thomas were all she had left in this world since losing her husband to a mining accident the previous spring. The thought of losing them too was more than she could bear. "Please, just hold on," she whispered, fighting back tears as Emily's breathing grew more labored. The nearest doctor was in Olympia, a journey impossible in this deluge even if she dared leave her children alone. Sarah had used the last of her medicinal herbs 2 days ago, and nothing in her small garden would help bring down the dangerous fevers consuming her babies. "Mama," Emily's voice was barely audible, her usually bright blue eyes dulled by illness. "It hurts." "I know, sweetheart, I know." Sarah stroked her daughter's damp hair away from her face. "Rest now." The wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the small homestead her husband had built with such pride just 3 years earlier. The storm matched the turmoil in Sarah's heart as she moved between her children, checking temperatures, offering sips of water, and praying for a miracle she couldn't imagine would come. Miles away through the torrential rain, Nathan O'Malley pulled his hat lower against the driving rain, cursing his decision to leave the Wildwood Saloon so late in the evening. The whiskey had warmed him nicely, and the card game had been profitable, but the skies had opened the moment he'd mounted his sturdy bay, Rusty. Now he was paying the price, soaked to the bone and fighting to keep his horse on the muddy road as lightning split the night sky. "Just a bit further, boy," he encouraged his mount, leaning forward against the wind. "We'll find shelter soon." Nathan had been drifting through the Washington Territory for nearly 2 years now, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. At 32, he'd seen enough of the country to know that attachments only led to heartache. The war had taught him that, along with how to survive just about anything including this god-awful weather. A flash of lightning revealed a small cabin set back from the road, a faint light glowing from its window. Nathan hesitated. Most folks were wary of strangers, particularly in weather that drove even sensible men to desperation. But as the rain intensified, driving needles of cold through his drenched coat, he decided to take his chances. "Might as well see if they'll let us wait out the worst of it," he muttered to Rusty, guiding the horse toward the cabin. Sarah's head jerked up at the sound of pounding on her door. Fear gripped her heart. Visitors at this hour in this weather could mean trouble. She grabbed her husband's old shotgun from beside the door before calling out, "Who's there?" "Name's Nathan O'Malley, madam. Just looking for shelter from this storm. I'm alone and mean no harm." Sarah hesitated, the gun steady in her hands. Thomas coughed violently from his bed, reminding her of her desperate situation. Perhaps this stranger was the answer to her prayers, or at least could ride for help when the storm broke. "I'm coming," she called, setting the gun aside but within easy reach. When she opened the door, she found herself face to face with a tall man whose dark hair was plastered to his head, water streaming from the brim of his hat and down his weather-beaten face. Despite his bedraggled appearance, his eyes were sharp and alert, taking in every detail of her and the cabin behind her. "Thank you kindly," he said, removing his hat as he stepped inside, bringing with him the smell of rain, horse, and leather. "Storm caught me by surprise." "It's been raging for 2 days," Sarah replied, closing the door against the howling wind. She noticed how his gaze immediately went to the 2 small beds where her children lay. "Your little one's sick?" he asked, his voice softening. Sarah nodded, exhaustion and worry evident in her face. "Fever started 3 days ago. I've used everything I had, but nothing's helping. They just keep getting worse." Nathan moved closer to the children, his brow furrowing as he observed their flushed faces and labored breathing. You got any medicine? Quinine, willow bark. Used the last of it yesterday. I've been trying to cool them with damp cloths, but her voice broke. The nearest doctor's in Olympia. Nathan ran a hand through his wet hair, thinking, I've seen fevers like this before during the war and on cattle drives, got some knowledge of treatments. He hesitated, then asked, You got any whiskey in the house? Sarah pointed to a small cabinet. A little, my husband's, I never touch it. Nathan nodded and moved to retrieve the bottle. We'll need this, and I've got some supplies in my saddlebags that might help. For the first time in days, a flicker of hope sparked in Sarah's chest. You know how to help them? I can try, he said, heading back to the door. Let me see to my horse first, then I'll do what I can. Sarah watched through the window as Nathan led his horse to the small lean-to stable adjoining her cabin. The rain continued its relentless assault, but somehow the night didn't seem quite as dark or hopeless as before. When Nathan returned, his saddlebags slung over his shoulder, Sarah had already placed a kettle of water over the fire to heat. She'd also set out clean cloths and a basin, instinctively preparing for whatever assistance he might offer. My name's Sarah, she said, realizing she hadn't properly introduced herself. Sarah Duncan. My children are Emily and Thomas. Nathan nodded, unpacking various pouches and bottles from his saddlebags. How long they been sick exactly? Emily started first, 3 days ago. Thomas the next morning, Sarah explained, watching as Nathan's capable hands sorted through his supplies. It began with headaches, then the fever came. Now they can barely stay awake. Nathan pulled out a small leather pouch and opened it, revealing dried herbs that gave off a pungent aroma. This is yarrow, good for breaking fevers. He reached for another packet. And this is elderberry, used it more times than I can count on the trail. Are you a doctor? Sarah asked, hope rising in her voice. A brief smile crossed Nathan's face. No, madam. Just a man who's learned what works when doctors aren't around. Spent time with a Cheyenne healer years back. He taught me plenty. He set to work immediately, brewing a strong tea with the yarrow and adding a spoonful of honey from one of his jars. This won't taste good, but we need to get it into them. Together, they coaxed first Emily, then Thomas, into swallowing small sips of the bitter liquid. Nathan then mixed a paste from another herb and applied it to the children's chests, explaining it would help ease their breathing. Where's their father? He asked quietly as they worked. Sarah's hands stilled momentarily. Mine accident last spring. It's just been us since then. Nathan's eyes met hers, and in them she saw understanding rather than pity. I'm sorry, that's a heavy load for one person. We manage, Sarah replied, straightening her shoulders. Or we did until now. As the night wore on, Nathan and Sarah worked side by side, changing damp cloths on the children's foreheads, administering more of the herbal tea, and keeping the fire burning against the damp chill that permeated the cabin despite their efforts. Around midnight, Emily's fever seemed to break slightly. She opened her eyes more fully than she had in days, looking up at Nathan with curiosity. Who are you? She whispered. Name's Nathan. I'm helping your ma take care of you, he replied, his gruff voice gentling. Are you an angel? The question was so innocent that Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. Nathan chuckled softly. No, little one, not by a long shot. He's a friend, Sarah said, smoothing Emily's hair. Now try to sleep. As Emily drifted off again, her breathing a little easier than before, Sarah noticed Nathan watching her with an inscrutable expression. What? She asked. Nothing, he said, turning away to check on Thomas. Just thinking you've done a fine job keeping them going this long on your own. The simple compliment, delivered without fanfare, touched Sarah deeply. Since James's death, she'd shouldered every burden alone, with no one to tell her she was doing well or that her constant worry and work were worth something. By dawn, the worst of the storm had passed, though rain still fell steadily outside. Both children were sleeping more peacefully, their fevers reduced though not gone entirely. Sarah, who had refused to rest despite Nathan's urging, finally succumbed to exhaustion and dozed in the rocking chair beside the fire. She woke with a start to find a blanket draped over her that hadn't been there before. The cabin was quiet except for the soft sounds of breathing from her children and the gentle patter of rain on the roof. Nathan sat at her small table, whittling something from a piece of wood, his movements careful and precise. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, her voice rough from exhaustion. "Couple hours," Nathan replied without looking up. "You needed it. They're doing better." Sarah hurried to check on Emily and Thomas, finding their foreheads cooler to the touch than they had been in days. Relief washed over her so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. "Thank you," she whispered, turning to face Nathan. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along," he shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just happened to be in the right place. Why were you traveling in such weather?" Sarah asked, realizing she knew nothing about this man who had ridden into her life and possibly saved her children. Nathan's hands stilled on his carving. "Was heading north, heard about work at a lumber camp near Tacoma." He paused, then added, "I don't stay in one place long." Sarah nodded, recognizing the restlessness in him. She'd seen it in other men who'd passed through that need to keep moving, as if standing still meant confronting something they weren't ready to face. "Well, I'm grateful the storm brought you here, whatever your reasons for traveling," she said, moving to the stove to prepare something to eat. "You must be hungry." They fell into an easy rhythm over the next 2 days as the children's condition steadily improved. Nathan showed Sarah how to prepare the medicinal teas and explained which plants she could find locally when spring came that would help with various ailments. He repaired her leaking roof, chopped enough firewood to last weeks, and fixed the broken hinge on her garden gate, all without being asked. Sarah found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, noticing the gentle way he spoke to her children, who had quickly warmed to him, and the competent manner in which he handled every task. It had been so long since she'd had help of any kind, longer still since she'd had a man's presence in her home. It was unsettling how quickly she'd grown accustomed to it. On the third morning, with the sun finally breaking through the clouds and both children sitting up in bed demanding stories and food, a sure sign of recovery, Nathan announced it was time for him to move on. "Storm's passed and your little ones are on the mend," he said, packing his few belongings into his saddlebags. "Best I get back on the trail." Sarah felt a pang of disappointment that surprised her with its intensity. "You could stay another day," she offered. "Just to be sure they're fully recovered." Nathan paused, seeming to consider her words. For a moment, Sarah thought he might agree, but then he shook his head. "They'll be fine now. You know what to do if the fevers return." "At least let me pay you for your help," Sarah insisted, reaching for the small tin where she kept what little money she had. "No need," Nathan said firmly. "Your hospitality was payment enough." Emily's small voice piped up from her bed. "Don't go, Mr. Nathan, you tell the best stories." Nathan's expression softened as he walked over to Emily's bedside. "Tell you what, Miss Emily, I'll leave you something to remember those stories by." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small wooden figure he'd been carving, a little horse, remarkably detailed despite its small size. Emily's face lit up as she took the carving. "It looks just like your Rusty." "That it does," Nathan agreed with a smile. He turned to Thomas and produced another carving from his other pocket, this one a bear standing on its hind legs. "And this one's for you, young man." Thomas clutched the wooden bear, his eyes wide with delight. "Thank you, sir." Sarah watched the exchange with a lump in her throat. In just a few days, this stranger had brought health back to her children and a warmth to her home she'd thought was gone forever. The thought of returning to her solitary struggle after experiencing such unexpected kindness made her heart ache. Outside, as Nathan saddled Rusty and prepared to leave, Sarah stood awkwardly by the garden gate, searching for the right words. "I don't know how to thank you properly," she finally said. "You saved my children's lives." Nathan adjusted Rusty's saddle, his back to her. "They're strong kids, probably would have pulled through anyway." "No," Sarah said firmly, moving closer. "They wouldn't have, not without your help." Nathan turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You ever think about moving to town? Might be easier than trying to run this place alone." Sarah glanced back at the cabin, the home James had built with such hope, where her children had been born, where she'd known both profound joy and devastating loss. "This is our home, we'll manage." "You're a stubborn woman, Sarah Duncan," Nathan observed, but there was admiration in his voice. "Had to be to survive out here," she replied. Nathan nodded, understanding in his eyes. He mounted Rusty in one fluid motion, settling into the saddle with the ease of a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. Looking down at her, he seemed about to say something more, then thought better of it. "If you ever find yourself near Tacoma, the Blackwood lumber camp is where I'll be," he said instead, "at least for a while." "I'll remember," Sarah promised, though they both knew the likelihood of her making such a journey was slim. With a tip of his hat, Nathan turned Rusty toward the road and rode away without looking back. Sarah watched until horse and rider disappeared around the bend, then returned to the cabin where her children waited, already clamoring for breakfast and showing the healthy appetites she'd feared might never return. Life settled back into its familiar patterns over the following weeks. Spring came early to the Washington Territory that year, bringing with it new growth and renewed hope. Sarah planted her garden, tended her small flock of chickens, and cared for her children, who had fully recovered from their illness and returned to their usual energetic selves. But something had changed within her. The loneliness she'd grown accustomed to now felt sharper, more defined. She found herself glancing up at the sound of approaching horses, hoping to see a familiar figure on a bay gelding. Each time, disappointment followed. One afternoon in late April, as Sarah hung laundry on the line behind her cabin, Emily tugged at her skirt. "Mama, when is Mr. Nathan coming back?" she asked, clutching the wooden horse he'd carved for her. She rarely let it out of her sight. Sarah smoothed her daughter's hair. "I don't think he is, sweetheart. Mr. Nathan is a traveling man. He has places to go and people to help." "But he helped us," Emily persisted, her child's logic irrefutable. "And you liked him. I saw you smiling at him." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Nathan was very kind to us, yes, but that doesn't mean he's coming back." "I think he will," Emily declared with absolute certainty before skipping off to join her brother, who was building a fort from sticks near the edge of the clearing. Sarah shook her head, amazed at her daughter's perception. Had she been so transparent in her growing feelings for the mysterious cowboy who had ridden through a storm to save her children? As spring blossomed into early summer, Sarah found herself thinking of Nathan at odd moments when the scent of yarrow filled the air as she harvested it according to his instructions, when she brewed elderberry tea for a neighbor's coughing child, when the evening shadows grew long across her porch, and she sat alone after the children were asleep. It was during one such evening in June, as Sarah rocked gently and darned a pair of Thomas's worn socks, that the sound of hoofbeats approaching made her pause. Visitors were rare at this hour, especially on a weeknight. She reached for the shotgun that still stayed within easy reach, a habit she couldn't break despite the relative safety of their small community. Standing on her porch, shotgun held ready but not raised, Sarah squinted into the gathering dusk. A lone rider approached, his silhouette familiar in a way that made her heart beat faster. She set the gun aside as recognition dawned. Nathan O'Malley rode into her yard, looking much the same as when he'd left nearly 4 months earlier. Perhaps a bit leaner, his skin more tanned from outdoor work, but unmistakably him. He drew Rusty to a halt before her porch and removed his hat. "Evening, Mrs. Duncan," he said, as if it had been days rather than months since they'd last spoken. "Mr. O'Malley," Sarah replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "This is unexpected. Passing through," he said, dismounting. "Thought I'd check on those young'uns of yours, make sure they're staying healthy." Sarah crossed her arms, not quite ready to show how pleased she was to see him. "They're fine, completely recovered, thanks to you." Nathan nodded, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Glad to hear it. They inside, asleep. It's past their bedtime." "Ah," Nathan stood awkwardly in her yard, hat in hand, seemingly at a loss for what to say next. "Well, I won't disturb them then, just wanted to make sure all was well." Sarah studied him in the fading light, noting the dust of the road on his clothes and the weariness in his stance. "You look like you could use a hot meal and a cup of coffee." Relief crossed his features. "Wouldn't turn it down if it's offered." "It is," Sarah said, stepping aside to let him pass. "You can tell me what brings you back this way while I heat up some stew." Inside the cabin, Nathan moved with the same quiet confidence she remembered, hanging his hat on the peg by the door as if he'd done so 100 times before. He glanced toward the children's beds, where Emily and Thomas slept peacefully, their wooden toys proudly displayed on the shelf above them. "They've grown," he observed softly. "Children do that," Sarah replied, stirring the pot of stew she'd placed over the fire. "Emily asks about you at least once a week." A look of genuine pleasure crossed Nathan's face. "Does she now?" "She does. Thomas too, though not quite as often." Sarah handed him a steaming cup of coffee. "So the lumber camp didn't work out?" Nathan took a sip before answering. "It did for a time, hard work, good pay, but not the kind of place a man wants to stay forever." "And where are you headed now?" Sarah asked, trying to sound merely conversational as she ladled stew into a bowl for him. Nathan accepted the food with a nod of thanks. "That's what I've been trying to figure out." He ate several bites before continuing. "Been drifting for years now, starting to wonder if maybe it's time to stop." Sarah sat across from him, her own coffee untouched. "What's making you think that way?" Nathan's eyes met hers, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. "Found myself thinking about this place more than I expected to, about those kids." He paused, then added quietly, "about their mother." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. "Did you?" "I did." Nathan set down his spoon. "Tried to put it out of my mind, told myself it was foolish. You don't need some drifter complicating your life." "Perhaps you should let me decide what I need," Sarah replied, surprising herself with her boldness. A slow smile spread across Nathan's face, the first genuine one she'd seen from him. "Fair enough." They talked late into the night, long after the stew was gone and the coffee pot emptied. Nathan told her about his years as a cavalry scout during the war, his time working cattle drives in Texas, and his drifting through the territories afterward. Sarah shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, her journey west with James, and her struggles since his death. "It hasn't been easy," she admitted. "There are days I wonder if I can keep this place going on my own." "You're doing better than most would in your position," Nathan said, "but everyone needs help sometimes. Is that what you're offering, help?" Sarah asked, studying his face in the flickering firelight. "For starters," Nathan replied, "if you'll accept it." The next morning, Emily's squeal of delight woke Sarah from a sleep deeper than she'd known in months. She dozed off in the rocking chair, a quilt draped over her. Nathan's doing, she suspected. Sitting up quickly, she saw her daughter launching herself into Nathan's arms as he knelt by the door, having apparently just returned from tending to his horse. "You came back," Emily exclaimed, hugging him fiercely. "I told Mama you would." Nathan's laugh was rich and warm as he returned the child's embrace. "Did you now? Well, you're a smart little lady." Thomas, more reserved than his sister but no less excited, approached with the wooden bear clutched in his hand. "Look, I kept it safe," he said proudly. "I can see that," Nathan replied seriously. "You've taken excellent care of him." Sarah watched the interaction, her heart full in a way it hadn't been since James died. The easy way Nathan handled her children, the genuine affection in his voice, the way he seemed to fill the empty spaces in their home with his presence, it all felt right in a way she hadn't expected. Over breakfast, Nathan explained to the children that he would be staying for a while to help their mother with some work around the homestead. Emily clapped her hands in delight, while Thomas peppered him with questions about what they would build first. "Your mama decides the priorities," Nathan told them firmly. "I'm just the hired help." "Is that what you are?" Sarah asked later after the children had run outside to play. "Hired help," Nathan leaned against the doorframe, watching her as she cleared the breakfast dishes. "What would you prefer I be?" Sarah set down the plate she was holding and faced him directly. "I think that depends on your intentions, Mr. O'Malley." "Nathan," he corrected her, "and my intentions, those are honorable if that's what you're asking." "Is it?" Sarah challenged, unused to speaking so boldly to a man but finding courage in the way he looked at her, as if she were something precious he'd found unexpectedly. "Sarah," he said, crossing the room to stand before her. "I rode 200 miles to get back here. Could have taken work at a dozen places along the way, but I couldn't get all of you out of my mind." He hesitated, then continued more quietly. "I've never wanted to stay in one place before, never met anyone who made me want to, until now." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying I'd like to court you properly if you'll allow it. No promises beyond that yet, just time to see if what I'm feeling is something you might feel too." The sincerity in his eyes, the careful way he phrased his request, not assuming, not demanding, but asking, moved Sarah deeply. It had been so long since anyone had considered her feelings, her wishes. "I think," she said slowly, "that would be acceptable." The smile that lit up Nathan's face was worth every moment of loneliness she'd endured. "Well then," he said, taking her hand briefly before releasing it, "I believe there's a leaky roof that needs attention first." The weeks that followed established a new rhythm to life at the Duncan homestead. Nathan repaired the cabin's roof, reinforced the chicken coop against predators, and built a proper fence around Sarah's expanded garden. When neighboring farmers heard there was a capable hand staying at the widow Duncan's place, they came with offers of paid work, which Nathan accepted while making it clear his primary commitment was to Sarah's property. The children bloomed under Nathan's attention. He taught Thomas to fish in the creek that ran along the edge of their property, showed Emily how to identify useful plants in the forest, and spent evenings telling them stories of his travels while Sarah mended or knitted by the fire. Their courtship progressed slowly, respectfully. Nathan never presumed, always asking before taking Sarah's hand or offering his arm when they walked to town for supplies. They exchanged shy kisses in moments of privacy, each one revealing a deepening connection neither had expected to find. By August, Nathan had become an integral part of their lives. He'd moved from sleeping in the lean-to stable to occupying a small tent pitched a respectable distance from the cabin. The arrangement raised some eyebrows in town, but most neighbors understood the practical necessity of having a man around the place, especially with winter approaching again. It was during the town's summer social, held on the first Saturday in August, that their relationship became publicly acknowledged. Nathan, scrubbed clean and wearing his best shirt, escorted Sarah and the children to the gathering. As fiddles played and lanterns glowed against the twilight sky, he led Sarah onto the makeshift dance floor. "People are watching," Sarah murmured as they moved together to the music. "Let them," Nathan replied, his hand warm against her waist. "I'm proud to be seen with you." Later that evening, as they walked home with Emily asleep on Nathan's shoulder and Thomas trudging sleepily beside them, Sarah felt a contentment she'd thought was forever lost to her. "You've changed our lives," she said softly, looking up at Nathan's profile in the moonlight. He glanced down at her, his expression serious. "You've changed mine more." They reached the cabin and put the children to bed, moving together in the practiced way of people accustomed to sharing such tasks. Outside on the porch, with the summer night wrapping around them like a warm blanket, Nathan took Sarah's hands in his. "I've been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant, "about the future." Sarah's heart quickened. "Have you?" "I have." Nathan took a deep breath. "I've saved most of what I've earned these past months, enough to make some improvements to this place. Maybe add another room to the cabin." "That would be wonderful," Sarah said, uncertain where he was leading. "Thing is," Nathan continued, "I don't want to build onto your home. I want to build onto our home." He met her gaze directly. "If you'll have me." Sarah stared at him, scarcely believing what she was hearing. "Are you asking?" "I'm asking you to marry me, Sarah Duncan." Nathan's voice was steady now, sure. "I love you. I love your children. And if you'll give me the chance, I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as joy burst through her like sunshine after a storm. "You know, when you rode through that blizzard months ago, I thought you were just a temporary salvation. Someone to help us through a crisis and then move on. And now, Nathan prompted when she paused. Now I know you're so much more than that. Sarah squeezed his hands. Yes, Nathan O'Malley, yes, I will marry you. The simple ceremony took place in early September at the small church in Centralia. The entire community turned out to witness the union of the widow Duncan and the drifter-turned settler who had won her heart. Emily served as flower girl, scattering late summer blooms along the aisle with solemn concentration, while Thomas stood proudly beside Nathan, the wooden bear tucked in his pocket for good luck. Pastor Jenkins, who had laid James Duncan to rest the year before, now smiled broadly as he pronounced Nathan and Sarah husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder, he declared, his voice carrying to the back of the church. Nathan kissed his bride with gentle reverence, then turned to include Emily and Thomas in their embrace. We're a family now, he told them quietly, all of us together. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with neighbors contributing dishes to the feast and music continuing well into the evening. As darkness fell, the newlyweds and their children returned to their home, no longer the widow Duncan's cabin, but the O'Malley family homestead. That night, after the children were asleep, Nathan and Sarah stood together on the porch, his arm around her waist as they gazed up at the stars. Did you ever imagine when you were caught in that storm last winter that you'd end up here? Sarah asked, leaning her head against his shoulder. Nathan chuckled softly. Not even close. I was just looking for dry ground and maybe a corner to sleep in. And instead you found us, Sarah said. Best wrong turn I ever took, Nathan replied, turning to kiss her forehead, though I'm beginning to think it wasn't chance at all. What do you mean? I mean, he said thoughtfully, that maybe some things are meant to be. Maybe I was always supposed to find my way to you and those kids. Sarah smiled, remembering Emily's innocent question during that first night. Are you an angel? Perhaps you were right to come when you did, she said. Emily thought you were an angel, you know, Nathan laughed. Far from it. I don't know, Sarah replied, reaching up to touch his face. You saved us when we needed saving. Seems pretty angelic to me. Well, Nathan said, drawing her closer, I promise to be very human from now on. They sealed the promise with a kiss, standing on the porch of the home they now shared, surrounded by the life they would build together, a life neither had dared hope for before a desperate need, a raging storm, and a chance encounter had brought them together. The years that followed brought both joy and challenges to the O'Malley family. Nathan expanded the cabin, adding 2 more rooms as their family grew. Sarah gave birth to a son they named James, after her first husband, a gesture Nathan supported, understanding the importance of honoring the man who had been father to Emily and Thomas. 2 years later, a daughter they named Rebecca joined the family, completing their circle. Nathan proved to be a patient father to all 4 children, teaching them the skills they would need to thrive in the developing territory. Under his guidance, Thomas grew into a confident young man who showed a remarkable talent for woodworking, inherited perhaps from the hours he'd spent watching Nathan carve small toys and useful household items. Emily, with her mother's determination and her adoptive father's adventurous spirit, became known throughout Centralia for her knowledge of medicinal plants, often accompanying Nathan when he went to assist neighbors during illnesses. The skills he had taught Sarah that stormy night became a family tradition, passed now to a new generation. The O'Malley homestead prospered as Nathan applied the various skills he'd acquired in his years of wandering. He expanded their livestock, built a larger barn, and eventually purchased adjoining land when it became available. What had once been a struggling widow's subsistence farm grew into one of the most productive properties in the area. Sarah often marveled at how completely her life had transformed. The loneliness and fear that had once been her constant companions were replaced by the warm certainty of Nathan's love and the busy, sometimes chaotic joy of their growing family. The nightmares that had plagued her after James's death of losing her children, of failing to protect them, gradually faded. On the 10th anniversary of the night Nathan had ridden through the storm to their door, the couple sat together on the porch of their much-improved home. Their youngest children were already in bed, while Emily, now 16, and Thomas, 14, were completing evening chores in the barn. "I've been thinking," Nathan said, his hand clasped comfortably with Sarah's as they rocked side by side. "A dangerous pastime," Sarah teased, the easy banter between them a testament to years of shared intimacy. "Perhaps," Nathan agreed with a smile, "but I've been thinking about that night the night we met." Sarah nodded. "I've been thinking about it too. How desperate I was, how close to losing hope. And how a half-drowned cowboy showed up on your doorstep," Nathan added. "Not exactly the hero you probably wished for. You were exactly the hero I needed," Sarah corrected him, squeezing his hand. "Even if neither of us knew it then." Nathan was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the distant tree line where the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "You know, I almost didn't stop here that night." "What?" Sarah turned to look at him, surprised. "I saw the light in your window, but I hesitated," Nathan admitted. "Thought maybe I'd try to make it a bit farther, find a town instead of bothering some family in the middle of nowhere." "What changed your mind?" Nathan's expression grew thoughtful. Rusty stumbled, nearly went down in the mud. "I figured it was a sign we needed to stop before one of us got hurt." He shook his head slightly. Funny to think how different everything would be if he'd kept his footing. Sarah tried to imagine it, Nathan passing by in the storm, her children growing sicker, the desperate measures she might have been forced to take. Would they have survived without his intervention? And if they had, what would her life be now, still alone, still struggling? "I don't like to think about that," she said quietly. "About what might have been if you hadn't stopped." "No need to," Nathan assured her, bringing her hand to his lips. "We're here now, all of us together." They sat in companionable silence as twilight deepened around them. From the barn came the sound of Emily's laughter and Thomas's deeper voice in response. Inside the house, baby Rebecca made a brief fussing sound before settling back to sleep. "Do you ever miss it?" Sarah asked after a while. "The drifting, the freedom to go wherever you pleased." Nathan considered the question seriously, as he did all of Sarah's questions. "Sometimes I miss the open country," he admitted. "The quiet of a night spent alone under the stars, but no, I don't miss the drifting." He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the last light of day. "What I found here is worth 1,000 times what I left behind." Sarah leaned over to kiss him gently. "I'm glad you think so." "I know so," Nathan corrected her, returning the kiss with one of his own. "Best decision I ever made, turning onto your road that night." As darkness settled fully around them, they rose together and went inside to their waiting family, the life that had begun on a stormy February night when a desperate mother, 2 sick children, and a wandering cowboy found in each other exactly what they needed most. In the years that followed, the story of how Nathan O'Malley had ridden through a terrible storm to save the widow Duncan's children became something of a local legend in Centralia. It was told at gatherings and socials, embellished slightly with each retelling until the storm became the worst in a century, and Nathan's remedies became almost miraculous in their effectiveness. Nathan always listened to these exaggerated versions with good-natured tolerance, occasionally catching Sarah's eye across a crowded room and sharing a private smile at how their personal history had evolved in the community's imagination. The truth, they both knew, was more ordinary yet somehow more remarkable, a simple act of kindness that had changed the course of multiple lives. As the Washington Territory grew and changed, eventually achieving statehood, the O'Malley family grew and changed with it. Emily, with her knowledge of healing plants and natural remedies, trained with a doctor in Olympia and returned to Centralia to establish her own practice, becoming one of the few female physicians in the state. Thomas discovered a passion for engineering and helped design bridges for the expanding railroad system that connected their once isolated community to the wider world. Little James, not so little anymore, inherited his father's way with horses and established a respected breeding operation on part of their expanded property. Rebecca, the baby of the family, showed an aptitude for teaching and eventually took over the town's schoolhouse, educating a new generation of children with the same patience her father had always shown her. Nathan and Sarah watched their children's accomplishments with pride, savoring the knowledge that each one had found their path, their purpose. In their later years, as grandchildren began to arrive, they often reflected on how their love story had created ripples that extended far beyond themselves. "We did well, didn't we?" Sarah asked one evening as they sat on the same porch where they had once declared their love, now expanded and improved but still the heart of their home. Nathan, his dark hair now liberally streaked with silver, nodded slowly. "We did. They're good people, our children." "And it all started with you getting lost in a storm," Sarah mused, her hand finding his as it had countless times over the decades. "I wasn't lost," Nathan corrected her with a twinkle in his eye. "I was exactly where I needed to be." And as they watched the sunset together, surrounded by the life they had built from that chance meeting, neither could doubt the truth of his words.